up or something that's not good on all the crop, and then they'll reseed it, and then new things will grow. And sometimes they change the crops that are growing. Like a lot of times you'll hear about crop rotation. They'll grow corn one year or soybeans and then hay. But we don't love doing that. We don't love the tillage. We don't love the spraying. So we do a lot of work to try to just maintain the soil health. And a big part of that is not doing that intensive tilling, not putting those chemicals on it. So we are really proud of the way that we just use this special seeder. And it actually comes from New Zealand because they have a lot of pasture lands there. Just put the right seeds in. And then the other thing we'll do is if you stop by our table, you'll see we sell clover. And clover is a lot like Timothy, but it's actually not a hay, it's a legume. And what that does is it actually puts the nitrogen back into the soil. So some years we'll plant some clover seeds onto it too. And that's really cool because that gives you the nitrogen you need. And if you just kind of like get some clover in some years and get some hay some years, you know, and bunnies love the clover. Well, and we have mixes. So, you know, we won't sell like pure clover. Also, clover, you guys have heard of how alfalfa kind of has high calcium. You can get bladder sludge, stuff like that. Clover has a similar profile nutrition, so we don't ever really want pure clover. So when we have a field with clover, it's usually like 10-15% clover that grows up with the grass hays. And they grow really nice together because the grass hay is a grass hay that uses nitrogen, and the clover is a legume that fixes nitrogen. So you get the clover putting the nitrogen in, and the grass hay using the nitrogen. The nitrogen is what makes things grow long and tall and green. So if you want like, you know, if you want really good, come on, that's okay. You want really good, strong, I may like not even technically started yet. I'm just like talking about things that are cool. Long grass, long green grass, that's what you get from the nitrogen. Should we go?
Yep.
All right, so the first thing we're going to start with is we're going to start with a quick video. We talked a little bit about grasses and legumes. You know, the hay that you see like this is a grass. The clover, they're little buds, you'll see. Stop by the table because you'll see them. They're a legume. But if you can maximize this, I might ask you to pause it occasionally.
Sure.
I used to be a teacher, so I do that annoying thing where you have to pause and talk about the video in the middle of the video. There's clover bud right there. And, you know, like you're familiar with the clover leaves, the 3-leaf, 4-leaf clovers, you know, but that's a beautiful, beautiful clover bud. And that's growing in the field. All right, let's keep going. That's my mom and dad at a BunFest. Hay is grown from small seeds. So this little bag here, this has 144,000 seeds. And that's my dad's seeding. That's Farmer Dave seeding with a seeder. It grows. And then it gets cut down. We use this thing called a disc vine, which is like a 10-foot wide lawnmower. And it puts it in a row called a windrow, and that helps it dry. Special machines fluff it. If you don't fluff it, it like mats down and doesn't dry well, and it kind of gets like gross. There's my dad on my grandpa's old tractor from the 50s. You fluff it, you rake it into these windrows. That's my wife, you'll see her downstairs, raking with an old tractor. And then you bale it, like that. You hear baling hay. Baling means you put it into these like cube sort of things. And we use this thing and actually like takes 15 at a time and puts them together. There's Diane taking a picture. She liked the hay. We use these wagons. That's my mom and my daughter. The hay gets put on these wagons. That's the machine that actually like sets them on the wagon. Then we carry them back to the barn. And a big thing for the hay is that it has to be stored dry. Same thing like that you probably experience on a small scale. We have to have a barn that really protects it, keeps the critters out, keeps the rain and stuff off, and even keeps the light out. On our farm, probably 10% of our hay goes to small animals. Only the like really, really good hay is rabbit hay. They're staying in my way. And that's our plug for ourselves, but all right. So let's start working our way through some of the info. So I think the next slide is a little bit about seeding, because that's like the first thing that you get into. So we already talked about that a little bit. But this seeder, like I said, it's pretty cool. It kind of like scrapes a little hole in the ground, drops the seed in, and then water and stuff kind of like lets it just get covered. And I told you, those seeds are tiny, tiny seeds. And the thing about those tiny, tiny seeds is you can't plant them too deep. So like if you used it like a normal corn planter or something to plant hayseed, they just wouldn't grow. Because these seeds are so tiny that if they're like more than probably a quarter inch or so in the ground, they can't make it. So there's my dad, Farmer Dave, seeding with our special hay seeder. All right, next slide, please. This is just a nice hay field growing. You know, it sort of grows up and it takes time. Hay takes about 6 weeks from the time it starts growing to the time that it's ready to harvest. So right now is, you know, give it a week or so, we'll start to see grass grow in our part of the country. It's so like refreshing to come here to Florida because it's like, look at all this green grass. Like it's so neat to see it because we're still brown and like it's just getting started or will be soon. So the first cutting that we usually do starts in late May or early June. So it's growing right now, or it will be soon. Next slide. Then we cut it down. So this is a nice first cutting that's being cut down. And again, we use this big machine. It's called a disc bind, which is like a large lawnmower. It has like 7 or 8 lawnmower blades that like go around in front and they cut the hay. And then it runs it through 2 rollers. And the hay kind of like goes through these rollers. And as it goes through the rollers, I'll see if I can kind of demonstrate. It sort of crimps it. So kind of like pushes it like this. And what the crimping does, when it like pushes it through the rollers like that, is it puts little kinks in it, like this. So, you know, why do you think you might do that? Why do you think that might be helpful to have kinks in the hay? Any ideas? Yeah, it dries so much easier if you roll and crimp it because, it breaks down the structure of the hay where at those kinks the water can get out. And what you want is you want your hay to dry really nicely and quickly. And there's ideal conditions we'll talk about in a little bit. But if the hay doesn't dry quick enough, the sun's still shining down on it and it's bleaching it and it gets brown and it's like it washes out. It doesn't have that vibrant green. So the faster you can dry that hay, the better. So you use little tricks like crimping. And I showed you fluffing the hay. That's called tedding. That helps it. If it sits down into the grass too much, like if it sits down onto the ground, it won't dry. Let's go to the next slide. So here's fluffing. So this is someone on a machine. And this, you kind of see these bars with teeth on it. Those they just spin and they take the hay off the ground and they just throw it up and let it hit the ground again. And what that does is it just like, if it's starting to mat into the ground, it's just like you take it and you fluff it. So it goes in and it does a lot at a time. So you can do a lot of acres with these hay fluffers or hay tedders. And it's like a really critical part of getting nice dry hay. All right, next slide, please. Raking. This was a funny day because this is my dad and this is a guy that was helping us a little bit on that day. We needed help because it was really, really windy. So ideal conditions for drying hay. And like drying hay right is probably one of the main things you can do. You have to cut it at the right time of year, but one of the main things you can do to make really, really good hay. If you don't dry it right, it doesn't smell good or the color's off or something. So this was a funny day because we had the wind to our advantage because, as the wind goes through the hay, it dries it better, just like a blow dryer, right? So you want the humidity to be low, you want the wind to be high, you want nice sunny days. But this day was a weird day because the wind was so strong that we would rake the hay into these rows and then it would like blow it out of the way. So like you're trying to get it with this hay baler, there's this part of the baler called the pickup head that you have to like keep in line with a row of hay as you're driving through the fields. But then the hay's like blowing away from you. So it wouldn't work. So if you look at how close these two tractors are together, it seems like a little bit irresponsible because they're going to like maybe hit each other. But we had to do that day because it was so windy that otherwise the baler wasn't picking up the hay. So you had to have just like a few feet between the two things to be able to make it work. But this is raking. Raking is like, you just put the hay in rows. And then that's my dad baling. All right, next slide, please. And then baling. So you'll meet my wife downstairs, Diane. She is a really good hay baler. She was baling here with the tractor, and then I think she just thought, oh, this is really pretty. I should put this up on Facebook or something. So she stopped, and she's there with her camera taking a picture. There's 15 hay bales right here. And then there in the background is the tractor that we would use to like pick that stack of 15 up and set it on the wagon. Next slide, please. And I showed you guys this tractor a little bit earlier. That's my grandpa's old tractor from the 50s. It's my dad, again, Farmer Dave. And there's, I think, about 180 bales on that old hay wagon. Okay, next slide. And then you store it in the barn. And like I started to touch on, there's a few things for hay storage that apply both large scale and small scale. So you want the number one thing is the hay has to remain dry. I don't know if any of you remember like the old middle school science experiment. Like you take some hay, you put some water in it, you let it sit for a little bit, and then you get to see all the microorganisms like moving around. You don't want that. That's what happens when the hay gets wet. So it's really, really critical to store the hay in a dry area. And like I talked a little bit, the second thing is, you know how I was saying like in the hay field, if you let a lot of light get to the hay, it bleaches it out and you lose some of that like vibrant green. Same thing in a barn. So this hay barn is made especially for storing really, really good quality hay. A lot of barns you see have windows in it. This barn has 0 windows. So when the doors are shut and you're in there, like I'm like out there with my cell phone flashlight, even if it's like bright glaring middle of the day, like I'm trying to see things because we store that hay in like perfect darkness to keep it preserved. And then it's also made so you keep all the critters out, you keep the moisture out, but storing hay is really critical. And that sort of also applies to how you store the hay. So say you're going to store your hay, it never gets humid here, right? No, you don't want your hay in a real wet or humid environment. So you have to kind of think a little bit about where you put it. You want it dark and you want it dry. All right, cold, hot, it's not as important. Dark and dry is how you can store your hay successfully. And you might, here's like a little insider tip, okay? Hay companies, sort of like us, but we don't care, want you to probably spend as much money as possible. So you're gonna like be thinking like, okay, I should buy like a lot of small boxes more often because it'll be fresher. Well, like you make first cutting hay during one part of the season, and then you stop making first cutting hay, and it's like that across the whole whole country. So like right now, you're not gonna get like hay that's like freshly made because it was just winter everywhere, right? So we're storing the hay in the barns in dark, dry environments. Say you buy a bigger box, like from us, our biggest box is 35 pounds. If you have a dark, dry environment to store that hay, it will easily last months. You know, like there's no reason to say like, I'm gonna get a pound at a time because every time it's gonna be fresh. Now, if you have a tough situation storing it because there's not good like low humidity spots or whatever, that might be a little bit different. But if you can keep it dark and dry, go ahead and buy the bigger boxes because first cutting hay is baled during first cutting season, second cutting season, third cutting season. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about first, second, and third cut hays. Could you go to the next slide? So first cut hay is usually baled in June or July. So like right now it's starting to grow. You give it about 6 weeks and it creates these long stemmy things. This is a first cut hay. You'll find these seed heads in first cut hay. You don't find them as much in second cut hay if they are grown right. These hay heads, if you ask an agronomist, they call them panicles. I know a lot of bunny owners call them different things. Floofies, hay Cheetos, cool stuff. Veterinarians love this hay because it's high in fiber, low in calories, low in protein, low in fat. It is like the health food of hays. For the same reason, bunnies don't always love first cutting, depending on your bunny. Next slide, please. So second cut hay, you cut your first cutting. You like collect it, you bale it, you get it off the ground. So you have what's called stubble, which are, you know, they're like, you see like zillions of little pieces that look like this, just sitting, you know, just kind of like on the ground. So there'd be like a root system under it. It would have been cut off on top. And then you give it 6 weeks and that regrows into second cutting hay. Second cutting hay doesn't look like first cutting. You don't see these, it's not stemmy. When you put your hands into it, it's not so pokey. Second cutting is like leafy grass leaves. It's soft, it's greener, it's a darker green. And it's probably more delectable to rabbits. Second cutting is by far our top seller. Veterinarians probably wished things didn't play out that way, but it just is how it works. It doesn't grow as tall. You usually don't see very many hay heads in it. It's lower in fiber, high in calories, high in protein, high in fat. And like I said, like if you're going to shove your hand in a box of hay, It's going to be a lot more pleasant if you like, you know, like dive into a box of second than first, because it's not so pokey, it's leafy, it's soft. Next slide, please. Third cut hay just takes it to the next level. So it's a little softer. Again, 6 weeks approximately since second cut was cut. You're not going to see any hay heads. It's the lowest in fiber, highest in calories, soft and pleasant to handle, and it has a distinct fragrance. Sometimes the third almost smells like a little bit tobacco-y. We don't know why, but people are like, oh, I think I smell like a little tobacco. And they're like, well, there's no tobacco, but it's like what it just takes a little different smell. But I'll tell you one thing. There's a far greater difference between first and second than there is second and third. Like, second and third are pretty close. And if you stop by our table, you'll see. But first and second are obviously different hays. Second and third are similar. First and second are very different. And a lot of it's just preference. Like, what does your bunny like? You know, does it like the softer hay? Does it like the coarser hay? Will it tolerate the healthier hay? Or is it just going to refuse to eat it? You know, so you gotta do what works. All hay is good hay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I always say, like, do you think you can use every single sense to identify good hay, or is that ridiculous? What do you think? Okay, not tasting it. All right. How about sound? Do you think you can use sound? Yeah. All right. So it depends on how intimate you want to get with your hay. Okay, so appearance, yeah. Is it green? You know, does it look like good hay? Are there like brown spots? Is there a lot of dust? Like, you can see these things. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes?
5 more minutes.
Okay. Smell. Does it smell mildewy? Does it smell moldy? That's no good. Texture. Depending on what you're looking for. If you want soft hay, is it soft hay or is it coarse hay? Sound? All right, so here's a little trick. And depending on the kind of hay that you're baling, it makes a difference. So when I'm out there in the hay field, and there's a critical point where you say, is this hay dry enough to bale or is it not dry enough? I will take the hay and I'll take like a bunch of it in my hands. So pretend there's a lot more hay here. But I'll take a bunch of it in my hands and I'll do a motion like this. And if I hear like, I'm like, that hay's ready. That's dry hay. That's good hay. And then especially if it starts shattering, it's time to bale. It's time to go. So for me, I do use sound. And taste, this is just kind of a funny anecdote. Sometimes we have hay that we are like, we're not going to bale this for rabbit hay. This is not as good. Like, maybe a rain came that we didn't expect and it got rained on. And then we had to like let it dry and then bale it later. And what we usually do is like give that to our neighbors and friends for mulch or things that we. But when you're baling that hay, you know, oftentimes you're like out in the environment and the hay is floating around and you're breathing it in and you're smelling it. And bad hay, I'll tell you what, when it's in your mouth, you know, it's not as good as good hay. So for me, at least, every once in a while, I have the displeasure of tasting bad hay. And even good hay, like when we're throwing hay bales around and stuff like that, there's hay dust and, you know, like chaff flying around and you do get it in your mouth and you can tell what it tastes like. So for most people, probably not. For some people, you get the pleasure of having that experience. Next slide, please. So I talked to you a little bit about the seeder. This is the seeder. So some of the things that you can do to make good hay is like seeding. This is an aerator. This pokes holes in the soil. So without like doing that really intensive tillage where you like break it up and, you know, really mess up the microbiome of the soil, this allows you to reduce the compaction, allow the roots to find their way to grow without doing that damaging tilling that creates erosion, messes up the soil. And the other thing is rotating in plants like this clover that put nitrogen in the soil. Next slide. Almost done?
Yeah, we got 1 minute left.
Okay. This is the chart that I use. Anyone can access this from the National Weather Service. I told you about those ideal conditions for growing hay. This talks about the temperature, the wind, speed and direction, the amount of clouds, and precipitation potential, which you want it to be 0. Next slide. This is a bad day. This was the baler got clogged. We don't want to see that. Next slide. This is a cool photo. This is my dad and I several decades ago. My dad and I and my son last year. And I think that's it. I know we're out of time, but I think we have a minute or maybe at least 15 seconds. Any cool questions? Yep. We actually are in Western New York State. So not to get into it a bit, like I'm proud of our area because that same Like you probably heard of like buffalo winters and lake effect snow. That same moisture that gives us lake effect snow lets us grow really nice hay.